Welcome, Eagles, to another edition of Trad Cat Night special guest exclusive podcast right here on the tradcatnight.org website. Folks, today is January the 23rd, 2020. Hope you all are having a very wonderful day. And to help get things kickstarted here with the podcast today, we've got a man who comes onto the program just about every month to help break down all the latest that's happening politically, geopolitically, and also helps to break down what's happening in the church these days. He's an independent political analyst, Paris correspondent for the American Herald Tribune. His website is, let's just spell it out for everyone. I'm going to put it up on the actual link itself, but it's GearoidOColmain.org. So we've got Gearoid Ó Colmáin on the program today, and we've got an awful lot to get through, an awful lot to report upon. So I'm going to hand it over to him. I know he wants to help break things down a little bit with the whole Soleimani situation, global pact, and education, the latest with Francis, perhaps some of the latest news stories coming out of France. Take it over, my good friend, and wherever you would like to begin, we'll get it started.
Great to be back, Eric, and Happy New Year to you and your listeners. A lot of things happened. Obviously, the Soleimani assassination was the biggest event to start off the new year. It seems to me that the Soleimani assassination was about basically wrong-footing the Democrats. In other words, sort of surprising the opposition to Trump, and in order to sort of gain control of the discourse before the election this year. In other words, playing the sort of on the idea that the Democrats support terrorism and therefore ramping up the Iran as a terrorist card and using that as a sort of a stick to beat the Democrats with. On the other hand, more importantly, I think Israel is the driving force behind U.S. policy towards Iran, and it certainly was the reason why Trump wanted again to make this very bold move in favor of Israel in order to get the Zionist lobby off his back, or at least have something very tangible to present to the real government of the United States, in my view, which is AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And I think that when he appears before the real government of the United States, he will have to show that he loves Israel more than anyone else. And so Trump's policy has been, we'll give you Jerusalem, we'll destroy Iran, we'll go to war with Iran. But in reality, the United States cannot go to war with Iran. It's just not logistically possible. It would just mean total world war, because Iran now is very linked with Russia and China. They've even had joint military exercises, and they're being supplied with Russian anti-air defense technology. Japan has also become increasingly present in the region and has now strong links with Iran as well. So this would, if the United States were to get into a war with Iran, it would pull in all these powers, and it would be a disaster. They couldn't do it. I mean, unless it would be suicidal. So what Trump needs is to sort of have a fait accompli geopolitically, that it's hurt Iran, it's sort of gone to war with them without really going to war with them, and he's going to sort of use that to score political points coming up to the election. I think that's what the Soleimani assassination is about. Having said that, it would not surprise me if even before Trump's election, if he pulled out some kind of an agreement with Iran. I do think that there's a possibility that in spite of what's going on, that there is a negotiation possibility, which I think is what Trump wants. We shouldn't forget the fact that Trump has already, expressed extreme belligerence towards North Korea, and then, surprise, surprise, he makes a deal with them. And so I think that this could also be part of hard sort of Trump negotiation strategy. So I think that's they're the main issues behind the Soleimani assassination. I mean, it's what's strange about this story is that obviously the plane, the Ukrainian plane that was shot down after, it seems now that it was it was a mistake by the Iranians, but I think there's a real possibility that the technology, the air defense technology, their air defense technology was hijacked, that the codes were changed. It seems that there's something like that may have been at play. In other words, this may have been a sort of a false flag attack. It could have been the United States. It could have been Israel, but it probably was due to a cyber attack that they got confused and ended up shooting down this Ukrainian plane. Again, we don't know all the details of that, but it does seem to be linked to the Soleimani assassination. So that's, I think, the main. To sort of sum up the main, they're the main points I think to think about regarding Iran.
If I could follow up with just a few points and get you to kind of get your take on this. There's going to be a lot of Catholics, as you know. I mean, you identify as a Catholic as well.
Yes.
With this Fatima message, right? We know eventually Russia is going to lash out. That's basically what the message is. Russia will be used by heaven to basically punish the countries of the world. There'll be various nations annihilated. And you and I both know what side Russia and China sit on. They sit on the Iranian side. So that was my main concern when I saw this first happen. I'm like, oh, my goodness, okay, how is Russia going to immediately react? And for all intents and purposes, right now, everything kind of seems clear. And who knows what will happen as a result of this. But we can't be too far off. I think most traditionalists say, okay, like, Russia eventually attacking the West, which is in Catholic prophecy, and overrunning Europe. I mean, it can't be too far down the road. So the whole Iranian situation could still blow up. I mean, I see what you're saying, but it's still, I don't know. It's still kind of like on thin ice, I guess you could say. And then the second reason, too, is also in relation to this third temple that wants to be built, and of course this is which will house the Antichrist. There are a lot of people who indicate, including myself, that there will be a false flag upon Israel, and the usual suspect typically that comes up is going to be Iran. And again, I'm not saying that Iran is necessarily the bad guy. I mean, as Catholics, we don't support the Arab world or the Jews per se. It's kind of back and forth, but I would just say Iran could be still sort of a hot topic. I think going through 2020 for potential false flag in Israel, but then also to fulfill the Fatima message. What do you think?
Yes, I think that, I mean, the possibility, if Russia with Vladimir Putin as the leader is the power eventually invades Europe. It would probably be due to NATO warmongering or a false flag attack against Russia. And the Israelis are the ones who are really pushing for war, and the Zionists have this messianic ideology which comes from Gershom Scholem, which is sort of catastrophist ideology, the idea that you have to bring about catastrophe sort of artificially in order to create the conditions for the Messiah, and this Zionist ideology is catastrophist. They do create willingly create the conditions of catastrophe, and it would not surprise me. And of course they have control of pretty much every country. If you look at the elites, in the financial elites in most of the countries, including Russia, most of them are Jews. 25% of the ruling elite in Russia are Jewish, and that's the billionaire class, and that's quarter of the billionaire class. And what that means is that quarter of the billionaire class in Russia many of them are Israeli citizens, so they have dual citizenship, pretty much like a lot of the Jews in the United States who are at the highest level of government. And so because of this messianic obsession with bringing this Jewish messianic obsession with bringing about conditions of catastrophe, it would not surprise me that they would create the conditions of total war through false flag attacks. What was interesting about this episode between Iran and the United States is that Soleimani gets assassinated, then you have a counterattack by Iran. Nobody's killed. It's 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 as if this is sort of coordinated. That the Iranians that they made sure not to kill any soldiers, because had they, if they had killed several U.S. soldiers, it would have forced reprisal again by the United States, and then you would have had tit for tat, and before you know it, you're in a full-scale war. It was obvious that the counterattack was sort of a cosmetic. It was saving face from Iran's side, and Trump sort of deliberately didn't escalate it. I think that the Trump administration, the policy towards Russia is quite positive, even though it's getting in conflict with Iran. I think that Trump certainly doesn't need a major war. I think that the only way Trump can win is sort of by, in a way, outsmarting the enemy. And so sort of, if you look at the US media, people like Tucker Carlson, who sort of represent the more intelligent sort of sections of the Fox News disinformation industry, it seems that sort of line is the only possible line Trump can win on a populist basis, unless he just gets tons of Jewish money, in which case you can win anyway. But if Trump wants to present himself as this great hero, he's going to need all the statistics that he has pretty much in the economy, but that could go belly up this year. I mean, it has been predicted that global crisis could come, but if he can keep that going, the economy, then he's going to need to show that he's some kind of peacemaker globally. And so he can't go into an election with a war in Iran in his hands, because it just won't work. So I think that Trump is probably, we probably will have more incidents this year with Iran, but it all depends as well. And Israel, in a way, can't win the wars it wants to start either. I mean, if they were to start a war with Iran, or get the US to do it, which is what Netanyahu wants, it would pull Hezbollah into the war, obviously, and they're on Israel's doorstep, and that would create such internal insecurity in Israel. I think that be very difficult to do. But right now you can see that with this, what's going on with this, this plane that was downed, the possibility of cyber warfare and reverse engineering and high technology. There's a lot of things that can be done without the public knowing, and that's sort of where we're going. Now it's sort of into cyberspace and artificial intelligence and so on.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Now, in terms of the second topic today, Gearoid, where did you want to go? Did you want to cover a global pact and education? Kind of break down some of the latest with what you're seeing with Francis and the Vatican Church.
Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, I mean, on the religious side of things, obviously, since we last spoke, there was that incident of the hand slapping with Pope Francis. I think sort of showed everybody, this isn't the first time that he's actually done that.
They were just playing patty cake, right?
Yeah, and I mean, just it does show, that he's real character, and that aggression and that contempt he has for ordinary people, in spite of his posturing. And I thought it was very significant. Obviously, the big thing coming up in May is the Global Pact on Education. And this is sort of all of these global pacts, these global compacts are coming about now. We had the Global Pact on migration, and now we're going to have the Global Pact on education. And this, these are, laying the foundations for a world system. I won't call it a civilization, because it won't be a world civilization. certainly not in the Christian understanding of what civilization means. It would be a global system, a global, a total reification of the world, essentially, an administrative global dictatorship. That's what they're trying to do with these pacts, and so trying to get countries to sign up to these policies. And now you've, after the global migration pact, which was about making each country agree to the fact that they were going to have indefinite immigration into their country and no control over it whatsoever, and that essentially the idea of nationality would disappear, and with the idea of nationality goes any notion of popular sovereignty, and each country gets subsumed into the global system. And in the Education Pact, what's happening now is to create the basis of global Gaia ideology, that all of our education will be geared towards sustainable development, the environment, Mother Nature, gender, confusion, etc., etc., and that would be sort of the basis of a global. Again, it shouldn't be called an education system, because it really is about just brainwashing the masses, turning them into mindless automatons. That's it's in America. You had I don't know what states they're in now, but you've got the Common Core,
Yes.
and Bill Gates and other billionaires and other oligarchs were behind that. And Common Core, I'd say, is sort of the basis of what they're looking for here, which is the lowest common denominator of de-education. That's kind of what this is about, basically, and creating just this sort of a global system,
Yeah, yeah. And since we last talked, there's more and more talk, more and more people coming to the side that I originally started. Again, I hope this doesn't sound egotistical, but I was the first to come out and say in the Catholic world that Francis was an anti-pope, and I told people down, years down the road, more and more people would jump onto this thesis, and sure enough, it has. Large publications like Regina Magazine now getting onto the same wavelength, if you will. We had these 3 Scottish hermits coming out, and they said Francis' papacy is heretical. He's not the Pope anymore. Then he got quote unquote excommunicated. Not sure if you saw that story. But then also Church Militant, which is a popular, I call them a false kind of traditionalist website, false right opposition. But even Voris and their sort of team is now open to the possibility, apparently, to Francis being an anti-pope, because a lot of these cardinals behind the scenes think that Francis is an anti-pope. And this is something Father Kramer on my podcast years ago alluded to, that he knew quite a few cardinals that were keeping silent about. One of them was Cardinal Pell, by the way, and we see what happened to him down in Australia. So it's going to be very interesting. But anything else? I mean, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, just a question to ask you there regarding Francis, because I saw a video a few weeks ago. It was a very good video. I think it's from is it Traditional Catholic? I don't know if you know that. Father Drummond, is it his name? Father Diamond? I'm not sure of his name.
Well,
now.
there's a website out there. There's a State of a Conscience website called Vatican Catholic. The Diamond Brothers, is that what you're talking about?
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it was one of their documentaries we made a few years ago.
Yeah.
But he makes a very interesting point about the Vatican. He said he was showing the date in which when Benedict XVI resigned, essentially, was the same date in which the dissolution of the Soviet Union happened. And he was kind of making the point that essentially with the resignation of Benedict, it was the dissolution of the Vatican State. And that, if that's the case, then it's sort of, if the Vatican City it means that essentially there's no Pope, after Benedict XVI, in the same way that Mikhail Gorbachev was the last leader of the Soviet Union. Benedict XVI was the last, head of the Vatican State, of the sacerdotal princely state, and that sort of sort of means that this is sort of post-Vatican, that was sort of, and I'm just wondering, and again, I don't really know how
Well,
one should understand this. I don't really understand it myself, but I'm asking this more, saying this
yeah.
more as a question. What would that mean? Or is that possible? I mean, that the Vatican sort of has been dissolved, because ultimately Francis, what he's doing now is he's creating a new foundation. It's like the building doesn't exist anymore, and he's now building stuff in Abu Dhabi. You know, you've seen the 3 pyramids that
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
constructing, or sorry, the 3 buildings, but they're in the shape of a pyramid of the, you know, the 3 monotheistic, you know, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and so on. I'm just wondering, are we already in a situation where, you know, because the Pope doesn't have, he doesn't fly with a Vatican passport. Apparently, he still has his Argentinian passport.
Well, that wouldn't
So I'm
surprise
just
me.
wondering, does the Vatican exist anymore? You know?
Yeah, I mean, in a certain sense, I mean, I've put out my thesis for many years on this because it ties in with Catholic end time prophecy of a pope to flee Rome. So when you say Benedict XVI, the last pope, I mean, there's going to be another pope after him. The Catholic prophecy indicates that there'll be a good and holy pope to basically undo Vatican II and all this nonsense. He'll have the
Mm,
gift of miracles or whatnot. But I think where I agree with you there, and it kind of makes sense, is Benedict XVI is going to be fleeing the Vatican here soon, fleeing Castle Gandolfo, according to prophecy. I think the papacy is going to end up in Fatima, Portugal. As a matter of fact, I talked to Father Kramer off air because he's getting ready to skedaddle out of Ireland because he sees all the headlines and he's like, "Yeah, this is getting nuts." He wants to end up in the Spain Portugal area because there's been some prophecies to indicate that the Iberian Peninsula will be safe. I think that the papacy could eventually reside in Fatima, Portugal, temporarily. Again, there's been periods, in church history where it's had to relocate. I think at one point in medieval
sure.
times, someplace in France. I forget the name off the top of my head. So
Avignon, yeah,
yeah,
the
Avignon.
Avignon
Yeah,
Pope,
Avignon. So
popes, yeah.
Francis is an anti-pope. The whole Rome goes completely one world religion. I think you could see the biblical false prophet either after Francis, or maybe we get one more anti-pope like a Tegel, that Tegel character, or maybe Turkson, that African prelate. So we could have one more anti-pope after Francis, but it could very well be that this biblical false prophet, who will be the sidekick to the Antichrist, show up in the next few years. Don't put it past it. It'll happen after the economic collapse or whatever. But yeah, it makes sense to me, everything that you said. I mean, Benedict could be on the run. He'll be killed, as Catholic prophecy indicates. So he'll move through Cologne, eventually be killed somewhere in Europe. And then the minority of cardinals will actually have to put another conclave together. And that could take a few years, Catholic prophecy says, by the way. We could be without a pope literally for a 2 to 3 year period. And that could be quite frightening when you're dealing with the whole one world kind of religious system, and most Catholics look around saying, "Where is the Pope?" I mean, that's going to be pretty frightening, I think, to most Catholics at that point, who realize, hey, this whole Vatican II thing was a scam. But yeah, no,
Sure.
I completely agree with you there. That makes sense to me. What you have alluded to, and since we have last talked, Vigano has been more vocal, coming out and warning about the one world religious system. Cardinal Burke, and again, hopefully they come completely around it and see it as we see it. But anything else that stands out to you?
Yeah. Well, on religious matters, there was a case here a couple of weeks ago of blasphemy on the state broadcaster, the state radio, France Inter, which is one of the main radio stations here. This comic basically wrote a song calling Jesus a homosexual, and this, there was a backlash from traditional Catholics here, because they are very organized, and they would not let this go, and so they managed to get an apology from him. So it was really a victory in the end for traditional Catholics in France. They would not stand for this humiliation, and of course, this is typical of the kind of stuff that happens all the time against the church in France by the secularists. But they will never do the same to the Jews or the Muslims. You'll never see this kind of ridicule of any other religion. So it's always an easy target, because of course it's the only religion that is a threat to the system in place. You know, um, another just bit of news on the on religious side. There was a study, a secret defense document was leaked recently, which showed that 15 areas in France are Islamist run. Essentially, are 15. You have quarters, you might call them quartiers, regions of cities and towns have been identified by the military as no-go zones, essentially as run by Islamists. So the Islamization of Europe continues apace, and it's the celerity of Islamicization in Europe is disturbing. So that's going on all the time. Another story here that has been in the headlines a lot in France concerns this writer called Matzneff, and this guy Matzneff, he was accused of, well, he was a pedophile. And this is, one of his victims is a 15 or was 14 or 15 when she was abused by him, and now she's written a book and about this this pedophile, and this sort of has been all over the press. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this, it appears that the press is now denouncing pedophilia. So you've got I guess the public gets the sort of impression now the elite pedophilia is being denounced by the press, but there is a sort of I think an ulterior motive behind this, as French intellectual Alain Serral very pointed out very, very eloquently, which is that essentially this writer, while he certainly was a predator and so on and so forth, it's sort of, this story sort of exists to mask much worse cases, because in this case he abused this girl, or had a relation with this girl who was 14. 15 is the legal age in France, and Serral kind of pointed out in his analysis here that this is kind of borderline, let's say borderline normal sexuality. In other words, like a girl who's 15 or 16 is legally entitled to have a relationship with a man, even though it's not some, it's still right. Sort of, it's still decadent and so on. But, technically it's still a man and a woman if it's 15, at least legally. It's not a problem. And this is a borderline case of and so on. And that's sort of what, according to Serral, what this is really about in terms of targeting this guy is sort of to cover up and really not have a debate about some of the very serious, like, child abusers who are in power. People like, for example, the leader of the Green Party in the European Union, Benjamin Cohn-Bendit, who has admitted in his books that he abused children. He had sex with children from the 1960s, 1970s. There's even a video of him on the internet talking in a creche, because he was involved in setting up like so-called alternative creches in the 1970s. And there's an interview there with him, and he's like surrounded by these kids. He's touching these kids as he's talking.
Wow.
And this guy is in the European Parliament, and nobody's ever attacked him. And he's never attacked by the media. They never even mentioned the fact that he's a pedophile, and he didn't deny it. I mean, he was a major pedophile legalization militant, and so it seems that sort of this case here of Matzneff is sort of again, not condoning anything that this guy did. It seems that it's sort of maybe you might call it a limited hangout, in terms of, it's a bit like Weinstein in the United States. Like the Weinstein case is like, well, a lot of these women sort of that Weinstein abused, they sort of bought into that, but there's much worse than Weinstein in Hollywood. I mean, what about the pedophile rings? What about the really dark stuff that's going on there? It's like, what the Weinstein case shows really is that Hollywood is run on, the corruption of sexuality. And, a lot of these women sort of buy into it. Now a lot of them are claimed to be victims, but the sort of there seems to be a kind of an agenda as well of sort of just attacking the male here. It's sort of like any man now who looks at a woman who's younger is potentially a predator, and there seems to be just, again, it seems to sort of this story of the madness seems to fit in more with this sort of this attempt to twist facts and pushing it, sort of so that basically the man ultimately is the guilty one in every case. And it just seems that, so this is a major story here in France right now.
Good stuff. But we're just about out of time. Unfortunately, I want to hang off air here for a second, get you set up for next month. I know you mentioned off air, you got a lot going on. I don't know if you want to give us any update as to what you've been working on or whatnot, but then also let's take advantage of some shameless self-promotion time. So let's get out the website again, anything else you might be working on, social media, all that good stuff, and then I'll close out the show.
No, I've nothing more to tell you. There's a lot of things I am working on right now. I'm still publishing many articles on stuff going on in Latin America, and I'll also be publishing an article on Myanmar, and I've been covering the so-called genocide there. So, and there's another article coming out about India as well, because there's going to be trouble there this year, and there already is. So there's lots to cover, really.
Yeah. Good stuff, buddy. Well, we appreciate you taking time out today. Again, hang off air here for a second. Let's talk for a few minutes. And folks, thank you all for tuning in to Tradcat Night's special guest exclusive podcast for this January the 23rd, 2020. Until next time, stay safe. God bless. Ave Maria.